So this is the one I did last semester. This one is based off of this kind of like floating island. And then if I zoom in, oops, too far. You can see I have little trees and I have this castle. Ignore the thing in the middle here. That's for. And then I have that castle right there and some houses. And then if I were to grab this, wherever he went, there it is, and I move this across, what we should see is all the stuff floating up. Okay, so the end goal of this, the idea with this one is that we'll either have the island kind of clearing its way or we'll have the island populating itself. Whichever direction you want to take yours, it could be fun either way, okay? Now if I get closer to the castle and do this, you can see that even like the castle bricks are all like disintegrating, disappearing. Okay, so that's the one I did last semester. Again, you can kind of follow the pathway for this one, or you can watch the other one or watch both and decide which way you like doing that. This one here, I'm not in my camera, good. So this one is more of I have this island that's floating, but I'm not going to be seeing the outside of it. I'm going to be more like flying by the ground. So I'm going to be kind of like self-contained, where again, the other one I was further away and I kind of flew into the island. This one I'll be just going through and seeing things kind of popping out of frame. Okay. The idea with this is that everything is super low res, super polygoned, so we can see all the different edges and faces and stuff. If I get a good angle here, actually, where's my camera at? Is my camera? Do you want to? Yes, that's fine. So it should look blocky. That's the idea with this one. This is a very trendy thing right now, is to make all your geometry not look realistic, but look very blocky, look very kind of low resolution. Right. That does. Okay. So you'll also notice some other things like the trees, trunks variations are different colors. I didn't make a different material for each one. I'll show how we can make a variety of colors using one material. Same thing for the tree branches here, the tree leaves right there. Okay. So I'm just going to make a new scene. I have my folders set up here. So I do have a 2510 Sarcona. I have images. This is stuff that rendered out just as a test. I have my reference images, and then I have my scene folder to put all my scenes in. I also have some sketches. So the one that I just showed, this is kind of the idea with it, doing something more like Native American, having teepees, having sticks with something draped over it, bow and arrow, rocks, that kind of thing. This was more along the lines of the one I did last semester, where I had this floating city with the mountains in the background and then the castle. And these are other props that I had on there too. I just didn't show everything because it was a really heavy scene. Okay, so I have some idea of where I want to go with this. So I'm going to do the Native American one. So now we're actually going to get into building stuff, like actually modeling things, tweaking things, deforming things. So I'm going to build just the ground first and then work my way around it. So I'm going to make my ground. And with this one, I'm using just a disc. Okay, I'm not going to see anything outside of it. I'm going to be focused inside, so I don't need to worry about any of that. I'm going to see the divisions. Now that we're going to be doing some modeling, I want to go over here to my display and turn my lines on so I can see what the lines are doing. And I'm going to add some more divisions here just so we can see what this is going to do. Now I need to get the mountainy kind of shape to this. What I don't want to do is I could click the button and start pushing and pulling stuff, but I want to have a more procedural way to do it. Something where I can adjust sliders or numbers to control the size of the mountains and position and all that. So under this deformer, there's a displacer. If I click on that, it's a purple icon. Purple icon means that it goes under it. Okay, the green ones would be on top and it would go inside. The purple ones go underneath. And what this is going to do is it's actually going to distort that shape. Whatever image or coloration I give it, it'll distort it like that. So think of like a coin, you have all those ribs around the side. You could actually displace those ribs without having to actually model or build it into it, okay? So I'm going to go to the shading for the displacer, and I'm going to add in here a noise. There it is. I'm going to raise it up a little bit just so we can see it. There we go. And you can see there is a little bit of movement on here, okay? If I go to the displacer and I go to object, I can change the height, and that will make it a lot more. Now, the amount that it moves is going to be several different areas that we need to play with. One is going to be this height. That's literally going to control the height of how far it moves. Right now it's moving in both directions, up and down. If I change this type here to just intensity, it'll just move it up, okay? So move the whole thing up in this case. If I go to shading, and yeah, that's fine. Then I go to noise. This is going to control where things are moving, okay? So everywhere it's white, it's going to move up. Everywhere it's black, it's going to stay down. The image over there has no black in it, so everything moved up, okay? So if I go into the bottom area here and I pull the contrast up, you'll see how I get more stuff that's stuck right to the ground and more stuff that is way up here at the top. Now, we can't see it, but there's actually an image. There's like a black and white image that's being projected onto this that's causing it to move up and down. I'm going to make it more visible by changing this global scale and making it huge. Okay, let me find a better angle. Let me take this contrast down some. Okay, so now you can start to kind of see where those mountains are coming in. Okay, think of this image. Oops, I just changed it. This image here that we had, we're like zoomed into just a few pixels. So this big black area here is not going to be moving, so it's more on the ground. And then the whiter area is where it's pushed up more. If I jump back to the disk and I jump back to these segments, the more segments I have, the more detail I have in there. So if I put this up to, just as an example, 200 and 200, and then I change this back to shading, you can see how clean and smooth we have that object being. Again, that we want this to be rough looking, so I don't want to have that many divisions. This will also start to move really slow. So maybe like 50 and 50 would be good. We'll see. I also need to go into that noise, and I need to maybe adjust this a bit further, maybe something like this. Now we need to have an area in the center that's kind of flat. That's where my village is going to be. So if I jump back to the displacer, you'll see fall off. And this is very much like the fall off we saw before on the effectors. So when we were doing these effectors here, we would see a fall off where we can control this area is going to be affected, this area isn't going to be affected. So I'm going to go into this, and I'm going to specify a spherical field. And you'll see only the stuff that's in the sphere gets affected. Okay? Now, I need to have a lot more control over this. I could do this. I could actually create, let's say, one ring that's all my mountains, and then just have a second ring in the middle that's just flat. But I'm trying to keep it as self-contained as possible without getting too complicated. So if I go to the spherical field and I go to remapping, this area here allows me to control what is being affected and what's not. So if we look at this graph, this is basically saying no affecting, lots of affecting, lots of affecting, no affecting, okay? So right in the middle, this is where it's affected most. I basically want to swap what this is doing. So I'm going to go to contour, and wait a minute. Spherical field, yes. Fall off, that, spherical, yes. Where's my shape at? Curve, sorry, wrong button. I want to switch this to curve, there we go. And this curve is what's going to be affecting. So this is basically saying no effect here, and then lots of effect there, okay? So I'm going to reshape this. I'm going to pull this down to here. I'm going to hold control and click, hold control and click, and then I can drag these as needed. So you can see as I drag these different areas, how I can basically control what's being affected and what's not being affected. Okay, So this is the center. Oops, this is the center. I don't want that to be affected at all, so I'm going to leave that flat. This area, maybe I want these mountains to be like that big. And then this area, maybe I want these to be a bit bigger. And then this area, maybe I want these to be even bigger. Okay? Now you can see how I have those different levels of mountains that are there. The tighter I give those shapes, the more defined those lines are going to be, and I guess more layered it would look. So instead of this being a nice flowing graph like this, if I were to click on this, hit Control right next to it, and then just start manipulating this curve more, you'll see how I'm able to create more of a contrast right next to it. And that will create more of this kind of like this level, then that level, and then that level. So that when I'm in here, I can see more of these different kind of levels and shapes that are around it. If I ever feel like this is maybe too small, a little bit too crunched, I just go to my disk, hit the scale key, and then I can scale the entire thing up. Okay, now that's scaling everything up, but that's fine. I'll just adjust it afterwards. Okay, because the only thing that's not adjusting is that noise color. That noise global scale is not getting adjusted. That also needs to get adjusted. So I'm just going to kind of make this a bit bigger, then go to the displace, then go to shading, then go to noise, lots of clicks, and then go to this global scale. And then eventually I'll hit a point where I can actually see, like feel that it's like moving. All right, that looks a little bit jagged, so I'm going to go back to my disk. Maybe I'll give this a little bit more divisions here. Oops, that's a way too many there. 20 is too little, 25, 45. 45 seems good. And 25 there seems good there. 22 seems good there. Okay. So now as I'm like zoomed in here, and I'm kind of looking at like what do I want my camera to see? What's the end image that I want to see? Ideally what would be cool is if I was able to see some mountains here, some mountains there, and then like an area where I could have like the sun kind of shining through. That might be like a cool shot. So I'm going to kind of spin around and see if I have anything like that that I could use. I don't see anything right away. So let me jump back to my displacer. Let me jump back to my noise. And then something else I can adjust is not only the scale of the noise, but also the kind of noise that we have. So by default, this is just set to regular noise. All of these are just different images of what noise would be. So if I went to, let's say, Hamma, that looks more like this. And so then I could, again, adjust my global scale. And then maybe go back to my disk and maybe take some more divisions here. There we go. Oops, too little. Like that, let's see. So now if I come into here, that actually might look really cool, having these kind of really pointy mountains and then having that opening right there for the sun to kind of shine through. So depending on the kind of noise that you pick, you'll get different results. Depending on the scale, you'll get different results. Depending on the amount of divisions, you'll get different results. Yes, sir. This is, well, this would be, in this case, this is just the top part, right? When I did the bottom piece for the other one, I actually started off with a cone, I believe it was, and I made this huge. Oops. And then I rotated it around like so. And then I used that bottom half as the area that I distorted, and then just colored the top and the bottom two different ways. Okay. Now I do see some flickering, something to kind of pay attention to. As I'm kind of spinning around, let me see if I can get it where it does it. It won't do it because I just saw it and now I'm trying to show it. There it is. So you can kind of see a little bit of like weird edge work there. So I'm just going to hit Shift R and just verify that nothing weird is happening. Does that look the same? No, it doesn't. Okay. So this definitely looks like it's cut or something like that. So I may have to adjust that. That might just be going into my displacer, going into the noise. I still have that contrast up, so it might just be like smoothing the contrast or just adjusting some of these other values. Great thing about cinema is it's very interactive. Dragging some sliders, you're either going to see something happen or you're not. You may not know what it does, but you'll definitely see something. I'll go back later and adjust that. Okay, that's the idea with the beginning area. All right. So now I'm going to drop this, or name this first, land. I'll make a layer, and then I want to start keeping myself organized. We will have loads of items. I want to make sure I don't move, ruin anything. So this will be land. I'm going to color the blue in all of these so they're all linked. And then I'm just going to lock this so I don't accidentally select it and move it or anything like that. So nothing in here can be moved. Then I'm going to go and start creating my trees. As we're going to have, let's say, hundreds of trees, we want to make sure that these are low resolution. Just as a for instance, let's say I created this sphere. And I'm going to do this. I could duplicate it and move it around. I'm just going to do this a different way, though. I'm just going to clone it. And I'm going to switch this to a grid array. I'm going to switch this. I'll leave it like that. Just simplify. I'm going to add a random effector to it. Oops, that's not random. I'm going to add a random effector to it. There we go. And so now that's like, imagine the bushy part of the tree with all the leaves. I'm going to randomize the scale of these. 0.8. There we go. Okay, and then I can just scale my original sphere down. Take my cloner and scale that down. Okay, so we'll imagine that that is my tree part. And then I'm going to grab a cylinder, and that's going to be the trunk. Okay, so I'm going to take these two items, and I'm going to Alt-G to group them together, and this will be tree. And then that will be cloned. And I'm going to do this as a grid. And I'm going to take the grid sizing and make this big here, make this big there. I only need one in the Y direction because I don't need them moving up. And I need, let's say, these have to be a lot smaller for these trees to work. So let's shrink these down. And let's go to our cloner and let's make, I don't know, 50 and 50. Okay, this is a ridiculous amount of trees to emphasize the point. So 50 times 50 is 2,500. Okay, so that's 2,500 trees that are there. Every single one of my points that I had on one sphere was then cloned for that bushy part. So that's, let's say, 36 times 24 times 9 times 2,500. That's how many divisions I have here. You can see I typed 50, and this is still thinking. It's still going through this process of what is this going to look like. It might crash. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Well, it's still thinking. There it goes. Okay, so now as I try to even spin around my scene, you can see it's going to do this, where everything disappears, and then it's going to pop in. This is like super dense. Okay, we don't want that. So I'm just going to try to reduce this back to 3 and 3. We wait. Whoops, apparently I just deleted it. There we go. Okay, so 3 and 3. And so now we're back to at least something we can spin around in. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my original stuff here and just pull it out just so I can work with them individually. Okay, so just delete that cloner for now. We'll just focus on the pieces. So these are my leaves for my tree. If I turn on my divisions, you can see all the divisions that go into each one of those. On the inside of these, there's like divisions, and there's no reason to because the divisions are on the inside of it. Okay, so you might say, okay, we'll just go into that sphere and just take the divisions down. So let's say I set this to 20, or let's say I set it to 6 or whatever. That's definitely a lower resolution than we had before, but it still gives me a bunch of stuff that I might not need on the inside. So I'm going to go a step further. I'm going to use this thing called a mesh volume. And what it's going to do is it's going to take all of those spheres and it's going to build a mesh around the spheres. Okay, so I'm going to say volume mesher, and it's green, so I need to take the cloner and drop it into it. And then when I click on this, Sorry, I did the wrong one first. I go to Volume Builder. There we go. It creates this very pixelated version of my trees. That's actually what I want because it will create a really low-res image. And we have what are called voxels. So if I lower this to, let's say, 5, I'll get more detail. If I raise it to 20, I'll get less detail. Okay, now the idea with this is that it's dynamic, so that as we go through and we're building these, I can come back and adjust and tweak what each one of these is going to look like. Okay, so let's say that this is what we want our tree to look like. I then take this volume builder and put it inside of a volume mesher, and now I have a very low resolution bushy part of a tree that I can still adjust. Here's my adaptive. So as I crank this adaptive up, you'll see how we get lower resolution. As I take this voxel range and adjust that, you'll see how we can tweak what that's looking like. As I go back to my volume builder and I start to play with that voxel size, you can see how I can add more detail to it or go the other way and take less detail. Okay, so I have a lot of freedom here to go ahead and play with what this is looking like. I can also go to my cloner and I could maybe add some more instances, and that will again change the shape of it without drastically changing the amount of polygons, the amount of divisions that are happening on there. I may also go to my cloner and maybe shrink this in a bit more. Oops. Let's go 10, 10, 10. There we go. And let's take this voxel size up some. Let's go to the volume mesher and pull that down some. I think I need to take my random parameters and make this a bit bigger. Okay, because this is controlling the sphere's random position, so that will give me, something a little bit more to work with there. Not really liking that at all. Let me turn this off, turn this off. Yeah, see, there's too many spheres kind of far apart. So I'm going to make the spheres a bit bigger. There we go. And I'll go to the cloner and make these even tighter in. And make less of these, 3 and 3. And then go to my random and rein these in a little bit more. There we go. So that feels a little bit better. Let's turn on the volume builder. That's good. Turn on this. And then we can just start tweaking that threshold. All right, that feels like a cartoony kind of tree. Awesome. Cool, so I like that. Now let's go to the cylinder. And on the cylinder, I'm going to go and add another displacer. Now if I know that I'm going to be using the same kind of setup for each thing, I can copy displacers. So I could go into my land, copy that displacer, use it on the cylinder, but it's kind of a different one altogether, so I'm just going to make it individual. So I'll drop that on there, go to shading, go to shader, add noise. Go to my noise, and then I can adjust, let's say the scale of this sum. So on this, I probably want a very shallow scale like that. That's kind of cool. I could also go into here and play with bulge. So I'm going to drop that onto my cylinder, say fit to parent, and then now if I go in here to strength, I can adjust what that's going to look like. Now we'll see nothing happens. Like even though this is on here and that purple thing is moving, nothing on here is moving because there's no divisions going vertical. So I need to jump back to my cylinder and add some height segments, and now we'll get more of a tree trunk type of effect. Back to my bulge, back to this. There we go, that's kind of cool. And less divisions going around it like that. Less divisions going here. All right, so that's kind of cool. It looks very, they seem like they're in the same world. One's not super defined and the other one's super loose, or the other way around, right? It's very cool. So I'm going to take this, and I'm just going to drop that into my volume builder. And what we'll see is it actually builds those two things together, okay? Because these two are inside the volume builder, it'll actually blend those two things together. Now let's see if we were to add a new material to these, would they keep it? They won't. So this one has one material, this one has another material, and I will give them big bright colors so we can make it obvious what they're doing. There we go. Okay. So now both are in the same thing. You'll see that the color doesn't carry. When we do this volume builder, it's actually building like a cloud, which is eliminating all the geometry. Then when we do the mesher, it builds a brand new piece of geometry around it. Okay. So for each one of these, I would need a separate volume mesher, but realistically, the cylinder doesn't need it. Just the tree part does. So I can leave this here. And now this and this, I can Alt-G and say tree, and there that is. Then I'm going to position this, so I'm going to move it down to the origin right there. I'm going to hit L and move the pivot so the pivot is right at the bottom. Whenever we clone something, that pivot is where it's cloning from. So if I had the pivot here and the object is way up there, then everything's going to be floating as I start moving it around. I don't want that. Okay. So I'll move it back up a little bit more, hit L again. All right, so now I would clone this, and what we'll see is that this is going to clone a lot more friendlier than the other one did. So I go to my cloner, I go to grid, that's what I had before. All right, we only want one in that direction, and I'm going to go with 1,000. Actually, let's make this 3,000. Yep. All right, so that seems to be the extent of where I want to take this. I can obviously adjust it after. And then I'm going to only go up to, let's say, 20 here and 20 there. Now, we might still get a lag because what's happening is for each one of these, it's rebuilding that volume. Ideally, at the end of this, I want to have just like a static tree, just like this is geometry and that's it. Yep, so you can see it at the bottom here, calculating volume builder, calculating volume builder. For each one of those trees, it's still doing that. So I still have one more step that I need to do. So let me reset this to 3 and 3. There we go. So I'm going to go into my tree here. I'm going to go into this volume mesher, go into the cylinder, and I'm just going to drag these down. Okay, oops, I'm going to control drag these down here. And then on these, I'm going to hit C, and on this, I'm going to hit C. So that will lock in any of the settings that I did to those things. And then these two are nothing now, so I can delete those. So if we look at what the tree looks like, come on. Oops. All right, apparently that one didn't lock in yet. Let's go to object and say current state to object. There we go. Now I can delete that. And that's locked in. Okay. So now this is just geometry. It's just points. That's all it is. Okay. Very, very low resolution. I should be able to grab this and add 20. And you can see how quick that went. I can add another 20. And you can see how quick that went. Okay, I could add 50 and 50, but it's going to be a bit of overkill. And this spins around very quickly. Okay, now the reason that I copy these down here is because if I had a valley of trees, I may not want them all to be the same. I may want some trees to have different shapes to it. So I'm going to go to my volume mesher here. I'm going to go to this solo. And what this will do is just isolate that one item. So I'm going to say viewport solo hierarchy. And then hit O. And then I can see what that looks like. So now if I go into this and I go to this random, this is changing the position of all those spheres that are there. And I just change this seed number. It'll give me brand new random numbers, which will change their position and scale and give me a brand new shape. So if I just click this up one, now I have a different shape. Click it up again, there's another shape. And so I can go through this and basically create different iterations for all of these and just make different versions. So I'll just take both of these and copy them again. Go to object, current state to objects. There we go. Delete the originals. And now I have two brand new trees. I can grab these, oops, random again. Click that up again. Current state to object. And now I have another one. So this one and this one. I'm just going to Alt-G and call this tree 2. Oops, did I miss it? Oh, I got it. Okay. And then I'm going to grab these two, Alt-G, tree 3. And then in my cloner, that one we called tree 1. All right, so I'm going to drag all 3 of these into my cloner, so I have tree 1, 2, 3. I'm going to unsolo this. Okay, so right now all my trees are exactly the same, or not exactly the same. Right now they're iterating, so it's going tree 1, tree 2, tree 3. If I just say random, it'll randomly put those in there. I could also go to blend, and what this will do is it'll actually take this shape, and this shape, and try to blend between them. Because they have different divisions, you'll get a mess. You can see it right there. So I wouldn't do that. Let's go to random, and that should be good. Okay, so now that's a random setup. I'm going to go to MoGraph Effector, go to random for the cloner, and just randomize their position here. So let's say 500 there, 500 here. Make sure they don't go through the mountains. Doesn't look like they did. Doesn't matter there's none here because I may not see way over there, okay? Or I might put my camera here and go this way. I'm also going to change their scale, so I want them to be uniform. And let's go to 0.9. If they're all too big, I can go to my cloner pieces and just scale down my original trees. And everything should stay on the ground. Or float slightly. Move this down manually. There they are. They were there. They just look like they were floating. Okay. Cool. Now I'm going to give them a variety of colors. So I'm going to go to my green. And instead of this being just a flat color here, I'm going to go to colorizer, I believe is what I want to go to. Let me verify. No, I want to go to MoGraph Color Shader. Nope, it was colorizer, I lied. Colorizer, there we go. And then if I go to colorizer, this adds the color shader to it. That's what it was. And then these are all my different colors. So it's basically for that shader, it's going to pick this black, this orange, or this yellow. And as I come out into here, I'm trying to find some of the things. Let me render and see. Nope. Color shader, color. There we go. I changed this to index ratio. That was the other thing. And then now I should have a variety. So you can see this one's orange, this one's yellow, and somewhere there's probably one that's black. There they are. Okay. So now what I can do is go into that colorizer and just give these different colors. So I go to this color and I say this is going to be this kind of brown here. I'm just cheating by just copying the same brown. And then I'm just giving this different values. So that. Okay, so now I have a variety of colors there. I'll do the same thing on this. I should also call these leaves. Go to colorizer, go to that. Oops. Go to color shader. Make sure that's set to index ratio. And then we just give this different colors of green. Pull that down, pull that down. Okay, so now we have different shades of green that are also inside this mix of trees. Okay, so everything's not the same, which is ideal, right? Especially when we still have some floating. Why do we have some floating? Let's take a look. Let's go to this. And I'm just going to solo each tree and just make sure that each one has their pivot in the right spot. So this one has its pivot in the tree. Yes, that's good. This one, let's solo him. Nope, see his pivot is below, so I need to hit L and then move up his pivot. There we go. And then the same thing here. Viewport solo, hit L, and move its pivot into the tree. There we go. So sometimes you may not notice that until you actually render it, and then it's like, whoops. Let's cover this bark. Okay, now I still have just a couple more things I need to do to get these trees to look a little bit more low resolution. Right now they look like they're nice and smooth. I need to really force them to look faceted. So on each one of these areas here, under this volume mesher, under polygon, you'll see this thing. This is controlling the sharpness of it. Okay, so at 80, right here, this is pretty smooth around it. The lower the number, the more faceted it's going to look. So if we look at that bush right there, that's what that one is. You can see how it facets it, or it smooths it, or it facets it. So I'm just going to go into each one of these and just set this all the way down to 0. Oops. And then go to the next one. Just type in 0. And go to the next one. There we go, and now we're getting that faceted look. I don't know what's wrong with that. Oh, those trees are the demo ones down here. So let's drop those onto a layer 2. New object, layer from selection. This will be construction. When I'm building stuff, I like to save those in case I ever need to come back to it. So I'm just going to open these up, assign that same layer to it, and then hide them, and then lock them so I don't accidentally do something. There we go. Now, another thing I want to do on this is I'm just going to go and create a physical sky. So I like to see what this is going to look like from the beginning. This physical sky will actually have like a sun and sky to it. I'm going to get my camera in here a bit further. And let's go to this side for now. Let's render it again. There we go. So we're getting shadows. We're getting some lighting in here. I don't like how reflective they are. That could be a good look. But I'm actually going to take the reflection off. So no reflection on these, yes. And no reflection on that. I'm going to give a little bit of luminance to these. So, oops. Just a little bit, just to bring it up some. And that way the ones that are like in the shade will still have some illumination. So you can see how we've lost the highlight, but we still have some shade. I think that could probably come down a little bit more. All right, and then one more thing I'm going to do, go to my render settings, set this to physical, and then on the effects, I'm going to add ambient occlusion. And what that should do is help kind of give us some more shadows in the background. You can see there's a shadow now there. Before, after, you can see it feels like they're actually touching a little bit better. Way in the distance, you can see how the shadows are dropping off more too. That looks nicer. Cool. And then I can start building other stuff. I want to build rocks. I build a rock the same way. Kind of shape the rock out, get it set up. In my example here, let's go to here, let's go to this. Let's turn that off. There it is. So here are my rocks that I have. I'll just solo these. So I created a sphere. I added some of that noise to it. Oops. And then the only thing I did afterwards is I kind of flattened out the bottom. So I went into those once they were all a mesh, volume meshed and all that stuff, other stuff. And I grabbed all the points like that. And then I just went to scale and I just flattened it out pretty much. Okay. Then I went into this sculpting tool, and this is kind of a neat way to move stuff around, is that you can go in here and do smoothing. So let me turn on my division so we can see this. I can use my brackets just like Photoshop. I can click and drag and it'll smooth stuff out. So if I've flattened this too much, I can just hit it with a smooth and it'll smooth it so it's a little bit softer of a transition. And then I can also go into grab, and I can grab parts of this and just kind of move it around. And when I did this, I actually built just one rock, and then I went through and just used this to kind of shape out the other rocks. So I would just take this then and just duplicate it, and then grab the grab. And then I would have this other rock ready to go. And then grab it again. You could also do things like flatten, so I want to flatten out a certain area. Oops. Flatten out that area. I can inflate. When you do characters, you usually use a lot of these tools, but for this, you can really use it to create some organic shapes. Yes, sir?
Could you do that to the mountain?
You could too, yep. You just have to make sure that it's not just a flat, not a deformed shape. So all the other stuff I did to the mountain where I have the displacer and that, I'd have to convert it to an actual just piece of geometry, and then I can do all that stuff to it. Okay? You could start off with just a disc and then just push and pull and grab stuff that way too. It's just a little bit more tricky to get that stuff set up like that. So here's this shape just as an example. Add some divisions to it. I would click on this. That's the button that makes it editable. And then I could grab, shrink this down, and then just go like that. But then if I realize, oops, I really want them to have a lot more detail in here, well, now I have to go back and start pushing and pulling and hopefully getting it lined up right. Okay, so you definitely could do that. Usually it's an after fact. Yeah. Okay, so on this example one here, that's all I have really are the rocks and the trees. That's all I have so far. Those two are pretty much, again, the same process for them. I did do a little bit more work to the trees where I added some kind of like branches sticking out, and then I did do a volume mesh on those, but I didn't obviously show that. So you can see what my trunks look like. So you can see how I have those things sticking out. So I just created the initial cylinder. I added another couple cylinders sticking out of it. I used the volume mesher and builder to create one solid shape. And then I just converted it and used that. So an extra detail that I think adds a lot of interest to it. Just because when we're down at this level, we can see these branches kind of sticking out. Whereas in this, nope, that's the old one. In this one, we just have basically the trunk going straight up, okay? In this one, I actually used pine trees. So there's very little of any of that stuff that I just did. I didn't use the volume mesher at all. I literally just created some cones and duplicated them. And there it was, rotated them some. Okay. The idea with this is low polygon. I want to show several techniques, show several different ways. You may not use every way or all of them or one of them really, but the idea is still the same regardless. Okay. All right, so I'm going to leave it there for now. Next class I'll go over some more stuff. Here's how I would build a building and get that set up so it can be destroyed. This will probably be a 3-week project. So we'll be working on this all the way from start to finish. The rendering for it is going to take some time because we're going to have to render out probably about 200 frames to get this to be a nice smooth animation. If we do it at 90, it goes way too quick. Just as an example of how fast this one was, because this was just a test rendering. Ignore that. The idea there. Let's hit play. You can see how fast that's going. If I were to add a camera in there too, it would just like feel really rushed. And so we really want to allow enough time for this whole thing to happen. So If we do it at 200 frames, that should give us plenty of time to give a nice smooth animation to it. What's that anyway? Oh, it's just a different angle. Cool. All right, so any questions on getting that started?